Welcome to the Black and White History Podcast.
Why are you saying it's all serious?
I'm your host, Kristian Bullard, and I'm joined with...
Oh, I'm supposed to speak? I thought this was your podcast, and I was just here helping. My name's Jordan. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be, I don't know, it's just bros talking about great historical figures in American history. And I mean, I'm a little partial to this country, so I tend to think that American history shapes world history. I mean, perhaps not before, but definitely afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot to go over. That'd be good.
Yeah, this is something we kind of talked about doing like pretty recently, actually. So there wasn't really a lot of like preparation. And it was like, we should do this, and let's start at the Revolutionary War, just work our way up and see how long this lasts.
I wanted to start before. I hold that
True.
We really should have started at 1687, but we can start at 1774 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, I think, what is it? Yeah, 76. Wait, hold on. You want to start when?
1687.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm like 100 years past.
Yeah.
Well, we got to get to like some. I feel like things get really cooking at the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, that's true.
And plus, we're releasing this like right around 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
So what better time than to talk? I mean, this is really just going to be a podcast of us going through the movie The Patriot.
I love that. Oh, was it Marion the Swamp Fox? Isn't that kind of how that's based off of?
Oh, in South Carolina
I think
stuff?
so.
Yeah, I know it's like around. Well, yeah, so I know that some of the names are changed. I mean, obviously, it's the most historically accurate war of all time.
Mel Gibson, the Swamp Fox.
Yeah. It should be like, instead of those memes I see of like for 4th of July, like, don't forget to put some cookies out for Captain America tonight. It should be, don't forget to put some cookies out for Mel Gibson's characters to show up tonight.
Don't forget to put some bullets out for Mel Gibson. Maybe not, anyways.
Yeah.
Not Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
Whoever, the Swamp Fox.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think this will be interesting. There's certain topics, once we'll get into, that I know more than others. This is kind of something where I was like, okay, I got like a general sense of what happened during the Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence, just the whole American Revolution itself.
Mm-hmm.
But there are still a ton that I just didn't know or just couldn't remember learning at any point. And so, yeah, I was as not only me talking about it, but also just intaking information. I had a lot of fun going through all this from start to finish. So
it's a super compelling story, honestly. Like, you couldn't have written this. You couldn't have made it up.
Yeah.
Like, if you had plotted it out, you would have had a lot more like glorious moments and a lot less of what actually happened. So, I mean,
if we made it up, this war would have lasted like 5 minutes.
Yeah, it would have been like a good 1-2 to King George and it's over. Yeah. Like, no, not at all. I wanted to ask, like, what are your like credentials? Like, what do you just like history? Is it like, what do you?
Yeah, there's times where I've been more engaged with it than others. I would say the last couple years has piqued my interest more than other times in my life, especially maybe within the last year in particular. And so, yeah, I just feel like I'm studied stuff with like church history thing with that. And so I kind of always felt during that, like, oh, this is like really important. But like with our own country, I'm just kind of like, I feel like there's a lot of important knowledge that is out there that I just don't have with it and everything. And so, like I said, I'm just kind of coming at this both as someone who knows things and doesn't know quite a lot either. Mm-hmm. So, what about you?
I mean, yeah, I've always liked history. I did AP history, AP US history, and then I got a degree in political science, and so, which had very little to do with like the founding of the country.
Yeah, I remember that class too.
It had very little to do with the Constitution, and very much to do with like how we just sort of like negotiate around it now.
Yeah.
But I always had a real strong interest in it because it was so unique, and so improbable. Like how a bunch of dirty farmers took on the world's greatest superpower and actually won. Like, how could that ever be possible? And it was just like the perfect storm of relationships, the perfect storm of like geopolitics of who was at war with who and when and who had rivalries. But like deeper in that, there's like, they call it the great man of history theory of like, there are certain people in the historical timeline that because they did XYZ things, they changed the course of that period of history. And I think in Revolution, you had like a collection of like 10 of those people who really were able to almost come out of the woodwork somehow and make these massive changes that almost 250 years later we're living in the consequences of that. And it's just, there's a lot of information, like you said, to like you can gloss over it and be like, it happened here and there was some stuff and then we won and that's it. Spoiler alert, we won. But like the whole story of the revolution is such a big and important thing. And it really sets up like the rest of the country's history and how we even got to where we are now. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'm been really looking forward to getting into this. So I have a bunch of notes just to kind of move us along through the timeline. We'll see how many tangents. And
you didn't memorize the entire history of the war from 1775 to 1783.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I tried to focus on like the biggest moments.
Yeah.
I was listening to like a couple podcasts just the last like month or so about this, and just there's like one in particular, this podcast that's just focused on only the battles of the war, and it's like a 50 episode podcast, and it only focuses on like all the battles and everything. And so we're not going to get into the weeds that much.
There's not a lot of weeds to get into. Yeah. We lost most of them.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, we'll definitely get into that. So here's where I have us starting. So obviously everyone knows, started out as 13 colonies. We were part of Britain and everything, and there was what's known as the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, and I'm not really gonna get into that. It's obviously kind of post all that, but at the end of it, Britain was broke, and the only way out of it was to try to look to the colonies for taxes. I think there's stuff I've seen, especially of both sides of this, where it's like, from the American side, this is like where everything's like, no, we're not gonna, you shall not pass. Basically.
No, I won't pay for stamps or tea.
But it's like, I really want to look into this as both sides as I can. And when you just see this like as the principle of it, it's kind of like, they need to raise the money.
Yeah, the colonists are a bunch of whiners. Yeah. Honestly. Like no love for King George, but the Americans are a bunch of whiners. They fought a literal 7 Years' War on a whole other continent.
Yeah.
Against like an entrenched army, and like to protect their colonies. And it's like, well, yeah, this is what happens in a war. Like, we don't necessarily feel it because our modern defense budget is just massive. So like they don't have to increase taxes on us to pay for wars because they just pay for it with existing taxes, which are much higher than they were in 1775. But anyways, it's totally reasonable that they would expend hundreds of millions of pounds on this war for the colonies, and then expect like, well, we gotta pay that back. Like, it's not crazy. Yeah. Like, in principle.
Right.
But some people disagreed.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, the colonies were so new. It's like, how much like revenue were they really?
So from the beginning, especially in the South, like the Southern colonies, like Jamestown in Virginia, like they grew a lot of tobacco. Tobacco was the crop. So like they had a lot of potential money. I think a lot of it was just they were just not used to. It was like a backwater, honestly. Like Britain was really focused on their near enemies and trade nearby, like France and all those neighbors. And we were across the ocean, so they're like, yeah, we'll get some exports from them, and they've got some cool stuff over here, but you know, we're going to protect this land because it's ours, and why not? We're an empire. We've been doing it for a long time. But I don't think they really saw them as a big cash cow until they kind of needed to, and they weren't going to tax their own people for a war that was just across the ocean. So it makes sense. They had some money, but it wasn't yeah.
So we go into 1764, 1765 of what's known as the sugar tax and the stamp tax.
Yeah, the intolerable acts.
Yeah, right. Which is kind of funny because, I mean, you look at this like, oh, okay, like I don't understand what the big deal, at least with the stamp thing. And I do remember this like vividly, like in middle school, like hearing about this. And my middle school teacher was let's just say he was very pro-America with this kind of stuff. And from what I remember is obviously, you know, there's a tax on stamps. Well, the use of stamps isn't going to be that insanely high, but if you just start stamping everything that everyone owns, it's like, oh, here's my document for the deed to my house, and then there's a stamp on it. You have to pay a tax on it. And then, you know, here's a deck of cards. Oh, well, there's a stamp on it, and you have to do that. And so it's really started to like, I can understand the frustration from the colonies with that, especially with like, let's see, it's obviously they didn't have any say in Parliament, like the colony. That's like the main thing of it. They didn't have any sort of say on it. So it's like they were forced to play this game that the rules were constantly changing, but they weren't allowed to have any sort of voice in the matter. And so you have like Britain being like, okay, well, we're just going to add these taxes. Okay, now we're going to add these taxes. Okay, we're going to add these taxes, but it's going to, you know, we're going to stamp it, or we're going to do this thing with the sugar, you know, molasses and like, you know, all these goods and everything. And it's constantly changing. It's like I can't remember where I heard this, but the best like analogy I could think of is like you have two teams playing, I don't know, let's just say like baseball. You have team A and team B. And team A in the middle of the game is like, okay, actually, we're going to add another shortstop in between first and second. So there's going to be two shortstop players. And team B's like, what? I don't want to do that. It's like, well, that's how we're playing the game. So if you want to play the game, you have to do that. And you're like, okay, fine, whatever. We'll figure it out. And start playing more. Okay, actually, we're going to move the pitcher back 10 feet. And we're going to take away this thing over here. It's like, well, what are you talking about? That's not how the game is played. And Team A is just like, well, so that's just how we're going to do it if you want to play. And so finally got to a point where it's like Team B is just like, I don't want to play the game anymore.
Yeah, this isn't really even baseball. This is like a whole other made-up game that if you were to have asked me with this rule set, I would have never said yes to playing this game. You hoodwinked me into playing cricket, basically.
Right, yeah, sure. Let's do the British version.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, like we said, from the British perspective of like raising taxes to pay for the 7 Years' War, that's reasonable. In the same way, not having representation in Parliament and not being able to say like, no, we don't want these taxes, or yes, we'll pay 1% but not 3%, or something like that. It honestly, looking back, hindsight being 2020, it definitely would have been cheaper and easier for there to be like a representative in Parliament for the colonies. Right. Now that, who knows what would have happened to Britain if that happened, because they had colonies all over the place. So it's not just like America. And they had, you know, provincial governors and such that were in place in the colonies to handle like daily affairs and communicate, but they didn't have a vote. Like they could say, we really don't want this. And Parliament back in London could just be like, thumbs up, thanks for telling us. We don't care. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter where you're paying it anyway. So it really is like that analogy about changing the game in the middle of playing it. It's just not fair. And, you know, there were a lot of really rich people in the colonies for sure, but there were still like the majority of people were not super rich. They were farmers, they were like cobblers, like they made shoes, and
Yeah.
it was like normal people really. And if you have to have a stamp on every single document, and the government controls what documents need a stamp, what, like I think it's basically like every piece of paper. Like if you have family back in England, that you're sending a letter to, it's just a lot. It's a lot. Like imagine every phone call you make now has a $5 tax on it just to make, or every text message is like a $1 tax. It's like, I don't want that. I need to communicate with people. This is the only way I can communicate with people. And now you're taxing it. Like it's like taxing water almost.
Right.
Which leads to the tea tax.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, saying of taxing water.
Get there. So obviously this creates a bunch of unrest and protests, and huge line in the sand is being drawn, and it's really starting to be split into two sides of, are you going to side with the crown, or are you going to side with colonies, basically, with what will be the militia side of it and everything. And so you start seeing all these responses from the colonies where they're just boycotting everything that they can, and they're starting to get pretty violent with people who are siding with the crown. This is something I never heard of. I'm sure you know about tarring.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you dirty loyalists.
Yeah. So all the people who were siding with the crown, the whole mob. And I don't know how often this happened, but
frequently enough to write about.
Yeah, where they would dump a bunch of tar on someone and throw a bunch of feathers on them, and to like humiliate them. But honestly, it's also probably really, really painful.
It's extremely. It's like burning hot, sticky tar on you. Like imagine when that dries, you have to like pick that off. It's like bonded to your skin. Like this is insane. Like I'm sure people died from that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So King George, speaking of which, from earlier, so he starts hiking up all these taxes on nearly everything. He's adding oil and glass and just paper itself, and but then he repeals all the taxes except for tea. And here's when we get to like the Tea Party stuff.
This is the last straw.
Right.
I mean, pause here though. Like the king is the king, and like there's a parliament, but this is still in the age where like the king was like the monarch and the parliament was like, all right, little people, I'll let you have a voice, but I really decide. Yeah. And so the fact that them boycotting these products that were taxed actually made them repeal the taxes, that's a crazy thing already. I'm sure it had happened before, but like this really is setting up just the general what am I trying to say? Like the time lapse between when London does something and when it reaches the colonies is like 2 months,
right?
Depending on weather, even. So like, because they got to cross a whole freaking ocean on a wooden boat powered by the wind. So like, bear this in mind for a modern audience. Like, it's not like he tweeted we're increasing taxes and then everyone's like absolutely not, and he gets it back. Like he just says it, and he has other business to attend to, and so he just assumes that this will just be done and I don't have to worry about it because I'm the king and I said so. And so when there's resistance and continued resistance to it, they have to reverse course. I mean, that has to mess with King George. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a literal appointed by God king, and you tiny dirty colonist peasants from across the ocean are telling my noble lords what to do. Like, this is crazy. And that attitude, that divide between commoner and upper nobility, it kind of explains a lot about like the battles and why the generals on either side kind of did what they did, because this had been the nature's course. There's commoners and there's lords and nobles, and you just don't cross each other. And now that these people are doing that, it's insane.
Right. So then, that's when he starts sending like a few thousand troops,
Yeah.
basically over.
Yeah.
They're getting like really like insanely out of hand. And
Which was, we're at the Boston Massacre, yeah.
this is where it's coming up.
This is another thing where, like, from the British perspective, I mean, I'll let you
Sure.
explain.
Well, let's go through
I'll let you
a
explain
synopsis and then. So Boston Massacre. So you're obviously in Massachusetts. You have all these soldiers everywhere, and there's so much unrest, and it's like. I can understand from the colonists, like, whoa, all these soldiers are just showing up.
Yeah.
And, and so.
They're under martial law.
Yeah.
In the major city. Like,
so around Christmas time, there's a huge mob starts breaking out where you have all these British soldiers and colonists surrounding them. They're all yelling at them and start throwing snowballs because this is in the winter, and people are throwing clamshells at them. They start getting like more and more like kind of violent and restless, and it's like at nighttime. And so you have all these soldiers who are like, we're probably also like really young and not super experienced, so it's kind of one of those like someone's gonna mess up and accidentally shoot someone. And sure enough, it happens, and 5 people are killed, and it ends up being a huge thing where it turns into like a propaganda piece with the colonists' fault. We'll just say our fault. But what's interesting is the reason why someone shot one of the British soldiers was because someone yelled fire, fire, and so they're like, oh, and it's like you can think of just the headspace you'd be in, and you don't know if like as a British soldier you're going to get shot or what. And there was actually a house on fire while this was happening, or there was at least a fire happening, and so it's really hard to get to the bottom of like, did someone just get too triggered finger and shoot by accident? Did they hear fire and one of the colonists was yelling it, and so they just heard it? Was it because there's a fire happening like right around the corner and people are like, oh no, there's a fire, and all you hear is fire, and like so basically the whole thing it's really hard to get to the bottom of. Basically
it's wild.
And so you have these British soldiers are now on trial, and this huge propaganda thing comes out where you have Paul Revere, which we'll bring him up a couple times.
Revere.
Yeah, the same Paul Revere. The British are coming, which we'll get to that also. But everyone's probably seen the image of where you have what was known as the Boston Massacre, because you have this picture of all these British soldiers just mowing down this crowd of people, basically.
Just grinning as
right. And so you see this,
civilians.
You're already upset with the British the Britain anyway, as it is. And so you say, oh my gosh, they're just like rounding a bunch of people up and just executing them and everything. It really wasn't like that. But there is a whole trial that happens, and the British, I keep saying the British, but
at this point,
we know what we mean.
There's a line at this point.
Yeah. The British soldiers, their defense attorney was actually John Adams, and he sides with them because he understands what the actual situation was. This wasn't like some coordinated attack where they're going to kill a bunch of people or anything. It was like an accident, and it was something that the colonists were egging on and like raising the temperature, if you will. And so, and they ended up getting
acquitted.
Yeah, acquitted. So they pleaded not guilty and everything. And so, anyway, that's kind of like brief summary of it.
When I was looking into the Boston Massacre myself, it started out like a normal night, and these soldiers, like a handful of soldiers, like less than 10 or something, and they were younger soldiers, I think. They're at, I think it's called like the public house, which is basically just like a small building where you like collected taxes, and like it was just like a small outpost in like the middle of the city. And then all of a sudden you have a massive mob of people who just decide to run up on you in the middle of the night, like these. And they're throwing stuff, and then, like you said, it progresses to like actual things that can hurt you. And these are soldiers. Like, imagine it. I mean, we've seen it in modern times of like there's a certain level of like protesting and like yelling that can happen, but then like if you start throwing bricks at the cops,
You're right.
they're gonna start doing something. Like they won't shoot you, but like back then they didn't have riot shields, they didn't have tear gas. They were just like, I have this pointy thing and this shooty thing.
Should I get one shot?
I got one shot, and there's 1,000 of these guys who are gonna beat me to death. Like I can like honestly understand how someone would be scared enough in that moment to shoot into a crowd, because like guns are just big loud things that say go away, and that's just what they wanted. Like I don't think anyone, you just say, but I don't think anyone wanted to shoot civilians. Like if they wanted to, they would have done this a long time ago. Like they just didn't want to. They still saw each other as countrymen. They're still British citizens, or subjects, I guess, not citizens. We're citizens, they're subjects. So, like, the whole dynamic of, like, these people are fellow Britons, we're not going to shoot them, we're having a disagreement, and then it just escalates from there. John Adams...
I think it goes to say a lot about John Adams' character. He had every right to just play it safe and just go with what the call, especially with someone who he wanted independence, but he still was like a man of just like integrity and truth and justice, and so I think that was good. That ended up.
He'll come back in the story later.
Yeah,
we'll hear from John Adams again.
So obviously, this is just heats up the temperature more.
Now we've got bodies in the streets of Boston. And isn't one of them like a kid, like a young kid? Crispus Attucks was one.
Okay, I can't remember all of the...
Of course you wouldn't remember Crispus Attucks.
No. Is he the black guy?
He was.
Okay,
yes, he was the black guy. He was the black guy.
He's the only person I remember.
There you go. I don't care about the child. I do care about the black guy. We'll cut that part out. Or not. I don't know. Now we've mentioned it.
So martial law really starts actually happening, like for real now. British send over a few thousand more troops. And this is really when the other colonies, because this is all like happening just in Massachusetts, really. All the other colonies kind of aren't really involved in any of this. But because of the Boston Massacre, all the other colonies start getting involved and decide that with their delegates, because, just like states, every state has a certain amount of delegates. All the delegates from the colonies come together and form what's called the Continental Congress.
Achievement unlocked. Form a Continental Congress.
Yes.
Form a rebel government.
Yeah. And this is where you got, your John Adams and Samuel Adams and
Hancock.
John Hancock, and George Washington's even there and everything. So this is kind of when George Washington starts kind of entering the picture a little bit. And so they start deciding to form the official like militia, basically, to seek independence from Britain. But there's a lot to figure out. I mean, you're basically kind of forming like an anarchy. There's no government. There's no one in charge of anything. It's just you just have all these delegates that were already appointed, everything from Britain.
And you have no like real authority over people. I mean, you're in rebellion against the government that gives you authority as a delegate or as like a representative, and so like they can't tax people. That would be a bad move, because that's why these people are now protesting, is because of taxes. So if I go and turn around and ask you for money, that's probably not a great move at this point. So they don't have an official army, like you said. They're just militia people, which are just volunteers. I mean, at that time, everyone was like every able-bodied man was part of the militia, technically, but there wasn't like an official Continental Army at this point.
Well, and especially because you're dealing with like three different types of people. You have the people who are like, oh yeah, independence, absolutely militia, like sign me up, day one. And you have the other people that are living in the colonies, like I said before, that are siding with Britain and with King George and everything. And then you have like a third sect of people where they just don't really want and be involved at all.
And that's the majority of
right. They like just want to be 80, left alone.
90% are like, I don't want a war at all. I don't like taxes, but I'm not going to kill anyone over this 2-cent tax per pound of tea or something like that.
So you have the whole Continental Congress and the militia and everything is like such a minority when it goes against the other two groups of people and everything. So, but it's, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do.
I mean, at least they thought so. Right. They really did, and that's the other thing too. They, like, these delegates, like Hancock and Adams and Washington and all those guys, like, they had a lot to lose. Like, they were wealthy people. That's kind of the only way that any of this could be pulled off, is because they had, like, personal money.
Yeah.
They could travel. They had servants. They had slaves. And I've heard a lot of, like, conspiracies about, like, well, the real reason that they started the revolution is because they wanted to break from the Bank of London because they were taxing them and interest and blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, that maybe they didn't want to pay more in taxes, but especially at this point, the likelihood of them losing everything and then hanging was way higher than winning. Like, there's. It was like a wing and a prayer and then a second prayer and half a wing that they were going. This was like the world superpower. They had steamrolled everybody else, indigenous people, other armies. They have hundreds of years of wartime experience. They just got done fighting a giant war. And that's like the only militia officers, the only, like, military leaders were former British soldiers from the 7 Years' War, and there weren't a lot of them. It was, I mean, a few hundred, several hundred. Like, it was not it was not the ideal scenario to go against the world in general ever.
Yeah, well, and I kind of wonder too if it's just the idea of, like, colonies are set up and they're kind of not only physically distanced, but also just becoming more more independent from them, and they're having to do things more on their own, and it's just kind of like, well, this was probably bound to happen anyway.
Yeah. And then you have, like, in between the colonies too, like Virginia and Massachusetts and Delaware were culturally different too. Their agriculture was different, their trade was different. So it's, I mean, compared to, like, Europe, even in modern day, like, the European Union is what, like 20 countries, but it's kind of like the United States, where we're like 50 different countries. Like, that's how it was set up.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that, to a lesser degree. Everyone was still, like, second generation British. They were all fairly culturally homogenous, very culturally homogenous, but homogenous meaning all the same, of one type. But even still, there were distinct differences and perspectives that created tension and conflict in the Continental Congress, and then in future debates into.
So we have all this happening with the Congress and everything, and Britain kind of catches wind of it. I don't know exactly how much. I guess probably understood some pieces of it. I don't know how much they knew about in terms of, like, actual, like, militia, like, literally uprising, or them how ahead of the game they were getting to that point.
I mean, I'm sure they probably had, like, you didn't need to look far for spies. If 40% of the people in the colonies are loyalists, and, like, there's a big gathering of a lot of soldiers with guns, and they're not British. We should probably tell someone about that. I mean,
no, that's true.
It took balls to do this. Like, this is, like, under direct supervision of the British government. Like, what are you guys doing? Declaring independence from you. Don't do that. We're doing it anyways. All right. We'll have a war about it.
Yeah, so that's kind of what leads into it. So the British come to start taking all, like, the supplies and everything and trying to get ahead of the matter. Which then we have Paul Revere returning in his famous the British are coming. He sees them coming, so he goes to warn everyone, and of course he probably didn't say the British were coming, because the colonists were British too. Yeah. It would be like me running down and be like, the Americans are coming. Like, well, we're all American.
Yeah, which ones?
Yeah, so he probably said something more like, you know, the regulars were coming, or the redcoats are coming, or something like that. So, but anyway, so they show up to Lexington and Concord. This is kind of where, like, the war starts to officially begin. And this is where you have the shot heard around the world is you have like both sides are just not really standing down.
Yeah,
It's a militia's here and British are here, and someone shoots. You don't really know exactly who shot first.
It was probably the colonists who shot first.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, if you think about it. Although now that we hear about we just talked about the Boston Massacre and how like, oh, everyone was scared and they didn't know and this, that, and the other. But also like these are trained actual soldiers on the British side. On the colonist side, you had militiamen, you had, teenagers like 15, 16, 17-year-olds who had never like done anything other than hunt with dad's musket. Facing down, again, the world's most powerful army. One of them probably shot first. If I had to put money on it, I would say that one of them shot first. We'll find out one day. That's my first question. Okay, who shot first?
In heaven, yeah.
Yeah, that's my first question. It was a colonist, duh. Oh, thank you. Okay.
So Concord battle leads to British British kind of lose the battle because they just don't even realize, like, holy crap,
we're being killed. This is working.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, this really is, like, I mean, we all know, like, oh, the Civil War, but this really was the first Civil War for America. I mean, this really was, like I said, people are divided one side or the other, the brother versus brother thing and everything. And so people are picking sides or being forced to pick sides, whether they want to or not, really quickly. But like I said, British retreat to Boston and everything, and so you think like, okay, wow, this is probably going to end like really soon and everything. Well, like I said, there was no one really in control. There was no like real authority because this is just the colonists breaking away. So you have these militias that have risen up, and you have different generals that have risen them up, and they all have different ideas of how they want the war to be and everything. And so one of them is Benedict Arnold. I don't know if you're familiar.
Poor Benedict. Listen, we can't forget what Benedict ended up doing. But for like the most of the war, Benny was awesome. He was a great, great general. And he really got screwed over multiple times, and he had enough. But yes, he was one.
Yes, so him and Ethan Allen were kind of the two.
Ethan Allen! Ticonderoga!
So they.
Poor Benedict. Oh, man.
Basically, it's kind of like the classic story of Benedict has like these great ideas, but then doesn't really get credit for any of them and everything. And so
no, Ethan Allen is a drunk hillbilly with his backwoods raiders, and Benedict Arnold has the perfect plan. I think it was to take over Fort Ticonderoga, wasn't
it? So for upstate New York. Yeah. So to get ammunition and recruits and like everything, So
like the first kind of one of the
basically it's like we won. Okay, now what?
Yeah,
I guess we should stock up on.
We need more guns. We're about to fight the British, and so like they go. Ethan Allen he leads his group of like rough and tumble kind of backwoods Southerners, and Benedict Arnold is a much more prim and proper British general. But he is a really brilliant tactical mind, and he has a plan for it. And Ethan Allen executes Benedict Arnold's plan. But then in the after action reports, Ethan Allen's like, it's totally my idea. I totally got before it. I'm going to tell George Washington, hey man, if you need anything, it's me and my guys. Screw Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold's very upset by that. But he kind of lets it go. He kind of lets it go.
Lets it go for now.
For now. This is still 1775.
Yeah. So that does bring up the issue at hand, though. I mean, it begs the question, well, who's in charge? Like, how do we just let people just decide that they're going to do, So another Congress is brought in, and this is kind of where you actually have George Washington be elected as, like, the main general.
The commander-in-chief.
The commander-in-chief. So we're pre-president, obviously, but, he's the commander-in-chief. And I just think it's absolutely hilarious that he shows up in his general uniform every day to these meetings. And but then they go, well, that guy's already dressed up. I mean, everyone knew who George Washington was, basically. But they ask him, or they appoint him to be the commander-in-chief, and he's just like, oh,
I don't know what's...
He writes all this stuff about how, like, I don't know if I'm up to the task.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, George.
Yeah, you wore your uniform when no one else did. It's like, I know, and he was apparently well known for like reading like etiquette books and like how to appear appear like you don't want the job even when you really do. It's like being a mechanic and wearing a suit and tie to work every day and then being surprised when you get asked to run the store. It's like, oh,
right.
Dress for the job you want. It's like, all right, fair enough. It worked. I like George Washington because he was tall when everyone else was short, and he was quiet when most other people were loud, and he definitely he was like a real person.
I think the best way to put it is he was a fantastic leader, but who really struggled as like a general.
He had a major imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, he really did not figure out. I mean, obviously it ended up working out because if we're here,
barely.
Yeah, but as a tactician, he that was just something he could not figure out, and constantly like the classic, we're being attacked, and then there's a flank happening behind him. He would fall for every time,
the same time, like 3 times in a row.
So as a tactician, he was really bad, but he was really good at just like convincing people to stay and to keep fighting and to just we can do it.
Yeah. It's like, how, George? I don't know. We're waiting for Ben Franklin to get back to us.
Yeah, there's a whole other thing going on where in France.
Meanwhile, in France.
Yeah, John Adams and, first Ben Franklin are in France trying to get them to help with the war on the colonist side and everything.
Because we don't have any money.
Right.
We can't tax, and we are poor except for a few individuals. So we need just like basic necessities. Like we don't have uniforms, we don't have blankets, we don't have tents. We don't let alone guns and ammunition.
Yeah.
Like they had to melt down a statue of King George III for lead. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
42,000 lead balls. Irony.
You're right.
It worked.
So, speaking of King George, he realizes that things are going south very quickly with losing the Lexington and Concord battle and everything. So he hires his cousin, William Howe, to take control, to lead the British and everything. And the Continental Congress, which is still kind of just made up of like New England, because the other colonies are kind of like...
Seems like a Northy problem.
You're right, yeah. So... they put out what was known as the Olive Branch Treaty, and to try to be like, okay, look, we had this big battle, like we beat you, let's just call like a truce basically and just move on our certain ways and everything. Obviously this wasn't going to go very well with Britain and with King George and everything, so there was really no meeting in the middle on both sides of it, so obviously it doesn't work out. And so colonies, let's see.
I think this is a good time to also like remember like generals, especially at this time, because like we are used to like modern armies and generals who like there's a very firm reporting structure and we are like paid professional soldiers, and there's not really like there's a little bit of ego, but like your personal fortune doesn't depend on like if you are a great general in victory and win a great victory. It's like General Petraeus was like a 5-star general, and he just sort of was in the army for a long time and did well enough to be promoted, or think of whatever, General Colin Powell, whoever. That was not the case in this time. Like individual generals would like gain and lose social standing if they had like individual victories and achievements in battle. And so their motivations weren't like, hey, everybody's got to come home, we're going to win this war for the country. It's like, I don't care how many of you have to die for me to be famous. And that's kind of where like George Washington was not a great tactician. Like he kept losing, but he was a great leader.
We'll get into. There's a lot.
There's a lot of that. But like he was a great tactician, or no, he was a great leader because he cared a lot about the soldiers, and he cared about the bigger cause for which he was fighting. It wasn't about his personal glory. It was mostly just so that he and everyone around him did not die. And the British did not really have that motivation. And you can kind of see some of that on the American side of like there was some jostling back and forth about reputation. Who was going to lead what army and who was going to attack first. And there was some of that on the American side, but it was very much on the British side, which will come back to bite them in a few years.
Right. So, like I said, the Olive Branch Treaty doesn't work. Basically, colonists try to be like, well, maybe we can, like, if we just lower the taxes and maybe we can have, like, a say.
Oh, no.
And
you're in full-on rebellion. You're all dead.
Yeah, Britain walks away without a counteroffer, basically. So it just goes absolutely nowhere. I mean, John Adams and stuff, they weren't even really... Him in particular didn't even want to send the Olive Branch Treaty because he was just like, it's a waste of time.
This is not going to work.
Yeah, we just need to, like, just keep fighting for our independence, basically. And knew that it was inevitable, basically. So, like I said... we got George Washington now as the commander-in-chief, and this leads us to the Battle of Bunker Hill, which takes place actually on Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill. But
yes,
it's one of those actually moments.
Actually, they wheeled the cannon up Breed's Hill, and it was a surprise move. And it's like, yeah, well, Bunker Hill it sounds cooler.
Right. Yeah.
Like it was the first one, and then they actually moved it to the other one.
Yeah. So nearby one of those just... Sometimes legends take over, I guess, a little bit. So, militia lose. But it's one of those things where, because there's such a difference in numbers and everything, you have way more British than you have, like, militia. But them losing, this battle in particular, the colonists lose about 400 soldiers. So they lose the battle, but... Britain lost about 1,000 soldiers with that, and so it was actually kind of like a worthy defeat for the colonists side, basically. And so it's kind of at the point where it's like we just need to damage the British wherever we can. And
at this point, they have something like 10,000 plus soldiers in the colonies right now, or at least on the way. It's massive, the amount of numbers and infrastructure and logistics that they bring with them that the colonists kind of have to patchwork together in like 6 months. Like losing 400 and losing the battle, but killing 1,000 British is like a massive, if not numbers, but like a psychological victory. Like you're saying, like, oh, we can actually go toe to toe with these guys. We'll hurt them more than they hurt us. If we can just do like 10 more of those, we're good. It was not to be.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of something with... So, keep in mind, I think, was this George Washington's first...
It was. It was like his first like major battle as commander.
So he ends up losing, which is obviously going to be a huge trend during this. I think what he was up against, though, and this is where it's like, can you really blame George, is you had these deployments that only lasted about 90 days. And so you have all these soldiers come in, and they, like I said, like there's no, like, they don't have any prior training or anything. And so he tries training him up as best he can, but as soon as 3 months goes by, then they leave. And he has to get a whole new batch of people to fight with him. And so it's like he's constantly... And you also just have people who are just fleeing.
Yeah.
Too, and they're just like, screw this, and they just drop everything.
I don't care enough anymore.
Yeah.
It seemed like a good idea when I was drunk.
Yeah.
And now that it's cold, I don't care.
Yeah. So... kind of, I mean, the way he trained and like prepared everything, like I said, like he was really good at that. I mean, to the point where he really had to build like men or boys to be men, basically. I mean, he would even like, I remember reading about how like he would like whip his recruits and everything, because it was just like he just really had to break them in order for them to like really understand. And just to be loyal, basically.
It's crazy because you're and on one hand saying hey, the people who have been in charge of us for generations, we're going to throw off that, we're going to throw them off. We're not going to listen to what they have to say. And then on the other hand, okay, but you have to listen to what I say.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, I thought we were all fighting for independence. Like, yeah, but you're not fighting for independence from me. We're fighting against them, and I'm in charge of you. And yeah, just like you said, they were just normal people who, I mean, they all had their own motivations for why they fought. Some were ideological. They really believed in the cause. Some were opportunists, and they're like, well, hey, if maybe I can advance socially or, get a commission as an officer or something like that, because they couldn't join the British Army or whatever reason. But, people were drinking on the job. People wouldn't stand sentry posts. They'd fall asleep at guard duty. They would steal from each other and steal from the supplies. They'd just run off. They didn't know how to dig latrines, so they would just poop in the camp. There's disease.
Right. Yeah.
Let alone marching, soldiering formations, how to shoot their rifle, their muskets. There was a lot to just teach them and learn in 3 months while being shot at by the British.
Right. Well, I forgot to even mention too, what you said, the disease. I think it was malaria.
Yeah. That
was actually the biggest killer. More people died of malaria during that, and so, there's definitely up against a lot.
Whose idea was it to march around Virginia in wool uniforms?
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, heat stroke. Yeah.
Could we not get some linen or cotton? Is there a summer blend or something? Because I went to Virginia years ago in June. It was hot. It was so hot and it's humid. And now you're gonna shoot at me?
Yeah.
I'm deserting. I don't care.
No, there was throughout the summer it would get over 100 degrees. And
this is a swamp. It's nasty.
People would literally die of heat stroke. So, I can't imagine conditions like that. So during this time, I mean, this is kind of loss after loss. We're just not. It's very quickly going south for the colonies. And George Washington, like I said, he's constantly being ambushed and flanked.
Yeah, just easy, the big one. Just easy stuff that is. And George Washington, he was like a colonel or a major in the 7 Years' War.
Yeah.
So he was of a upper middle rank. So he had some experience, and he was part of the Virginia militia during that war. So he wasn't completely inexperienced, but fighting against Indians is very different from fighting against another peer threat.
Right.
And they still, I mean, at this point, we're talking 1776, 77, 78. They're still fighting in the Napoleonic, okay, you stand here and I'll stand here 150 yards apart, and then we'll shoot at each other. And then we'll move together and we'll shoot again and just take turns. But again, you're running into, these people don't have food. They don't have adequate supplies or uniforms. Their guns are not high quality like the British were. They're low on ammunition and powder, and they've only been trained for a month. And they're going against professional soldiers who have done this many times, a lot of them for their entire lives. And it's just not, it just doesn't work. They don't have enough people to really have a stand-up boxing match with Britain. They just lose every time.
Right. Yeah, so, and it's getting to the point where basically he's they're thinking about replacing and firing George and everything. But then we have kind of a miracle happens. You have the late, great Henry Knox, a bookkeeper who he's about 300 pounds and spends 2 months delivering to Boston. This is kind of where George ends up being all these ammo and supplies, because at this point they've used up all the resources they have. The militia has nothing basically. But then right when all hope is, there's a few of these when all hope is lost. And the first one of these is Henry Knox shows up.
Hello, I've got bullets.
And
thank you, Henry.
Yeah, literally 2 months, and gives them everything they need. And so it was really good. I mean, when times where it was so tough, it was going to end, he really had to pull. George had to really I know we're being like very friendly,
Yeah.
you know, but it's true. I mean, like he had to like hang on so tightly, and so it was a miracle that that was able to happen. And then that does lead to a couple wins. He wins the city of Boston in particular and everything, and so that would not have happened if Henry Knox didn't show up. So good morale. It was at least a morale boost. Yeah. It was like they were still on the losing end on this, but it's like they had to like win something to just like even believe that there was even a chance for this to work out. And so John Howe, we mentioned him earlier, the cousin of King George. So he ends up trying to work something out with the colonies, and at this point, which is funny, it's like the opposite. Like first the colonies were like, hey, here's this olive branch treaty, we can try to, and Britain's like, no. And now John Howe is like, hey, maybe we can try to, and at this point it's like we're already so deep in at this point, you know,
we gotta finish this.
So that ends up going nowhere, because at this point the colonies have already decided like, no, like we're declaring for independence and everything.
And thousands of people have died already at this point. Like you really can't wash your hands of it and pretend like it didn't happen. Like, it's a lot.
All right. Well, I think that's a good spot to end there. Yeah. We'll go ahead and pick up in part 2. Can't all be said in 1 4-hour long.
I mean, we could try it.
It's true.
We could go off
you and I could just keep going in tangents. But...
Yes. And then remember Horatio Gates. Lay off Horatio Gates for a second.
No, okay. We'll pick it up in part 2.
Yeah.